using gifts that all have gifts. We all have gifts in the community. And once again, we come from this perspective that we all have a piece to this puzzle. How often have we ever put together a puzzle and there's a few pieces missing? How frustrating it is that we put all that work in and there's these gaps and these holes. Those are individuals in our community that we forgot to reach out to, forgot to include, or we made a conscious or unconscious decision not to include them, which are just as damaging. So reach out to everyone. Believe in the possibilities that ABCD is rooted in the hope, that being positive and proactive, saying, look, we may only have this right now, but this is something we can start with, and we're going to build a momentum, and more people are going to join, and more people will come with different gifts. Lead by stepping back. Once again, that's probably the hardest thing for leaders. All of you are leaders in your realm, because we think, and we probably, maybe it is true, we might be able to do it better if we go on and do it ourselves. But the idea there is, you can, what's that old proverb? You can go fast being alone, but you can go further by being in a group. The idea here is that you want to step back and let people struggle with those challenges and not just give them answers. How often do we know of individuals, maybe our children, when you let the child wrestle with their own solution, how when they finally figure it out, the excitement that they have and the impact it has on them versus you just telling them this is how you can do it. So let them struggle with that. People in recovery from trauma or addiction, that's very important because they get agency over their life. They feel like they have control once again. And once again, they discover their gifts that, hey, I can do this. I don't need someone to tell me how to do this. I know how to do this. And include everyone, even that person who's a grumpy, whatever you want to call them. They're, always critical, whatever. Find ways to reach out and include them. Get them to the table. Somehow have them demonstrate that they are contributing, even if they're making the group itself think twice or three times, honing themselves, making sure those decisions are right. But include everyone, possibly that you can. So ABC is not neutral. It just doesn't happen naturally. You have to do it through community building and social inclusion. The decolonization in the sense of the power structure, one dominant person over another. You want to flatten the power aspect and have equality as much as possible. Co-production of services, co-creation, where people are producing things and it's just not a founder, but there are co-founders. Building livelihoods, looking at the aspect of social entrepreneurship. How can you build lives and livelihoods in your process so that your projects are sustainable and also can be replicated elsewhere, and then create alternative economies. Look beyond just money. At one time there was a barter system, and we'll go in more detail, where someone would trade a chicken or eggs for a ham or whatever. The idea is it's not just comes down to money alone. There's a lot of other aspects of alternative economies. So it asks the question, what is your end game? What is it that your end game? And then you try to work backwards from that, utilizing ABCD to discover it. So that's kind of a very quick overview. I may have gone over a little bit of time. I wanted to try to save some time, but are there any questions so far? All this is just kind of a introduction, and we're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper as we go through the sessions. But anybody have any questions at this point that they'd like to share or lift up? that maybe I said that you didn't understand or anything? Oh,
No
here's the
question.
Western proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, absolutely.
What was
Go
the
ahead.
saying?
Someone was
People,
talking. Jonathan?
yeah, I was just want to circle back to what did you say? People objects and people resources. Could you repeat that part?
Yeah, so the idea for ABCD is we don't want to treat people like objects where we do things to them. Okay. We also don't want to treat people like recipients. That was the word I was trying to get. Recipients or consumers where we do things for them. We want to treat people like resources where we do things with them. And if you think about our lives, be it in school or even going to a restaurant, how often have we been treated like objects? As a child, our parents kind of did things to us. I mean, put on your clothes, they put on our clothes, whatever, when we were younger. In school, teachers would, professors will do things for us. They'll educate us and give us tests and try to. But the idea here is ABCD. When you're working with the community, find ways to do things with people, walk along with them, let them struggle just as much as you struggle with it. And the idea is they're just there's as much as resources as you are. And it's not the resources that you have available to you that's important. Someone say, I don't have any money, I don't know anybody in power. It's not that defines a person. It's the resourcefulness that's within you. It's how do you take something and create something out of nothing, or at least what you perceived as having nothing. That's what makes it great. And ABCD practitioners like you all, you're looking for that moment when individuals can create, and you're doing it with them so that when you leave or move on to another job or another community, that community's humming because they didn't depend on you to do it to them or for them. You did it with them, and ultimately they got the agency to be able to do it themselves. That's ABCD. Go ahead. Is it Chanel?
Chanel.
Yeah, Chanel. Go ahead, Chanel.
Okay, thank you, John. Two things. One, is there any way we're going to get printouts of some of the stuff we go over so that way we could, pack that in our toolbox to work with? And then also, are we going to discuss more of creative alternative economies? Because, we're looking at sustainability here. When we're looking at programs that are running, they run into issues of sustainability for resources. It may also be educating people more of how to become more sustainable. So, you talked about bartering. To me, if I have tea and you have soap, we can trade. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. That's
So
right.
I'm looking at to see how much are we going to go into that. Is that part of this as well, to talk a little bit about creative alternative economies?
It will be just a little bit because we have like 6 assets and one of them is like local economy exchange. So it's like about 20 minutes or so. And that's like on the second session.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see this creative alternatives in the second session. We'll be doing that. And then of course, change within the system will be the third session. But we can try to go a little deeper if you like. We'll try to, go deeper in that and have those discussions.
Okay. And then will we be able to get some of those printouts sent to our emails?
Yeah, I think that Eva's, then you put it in the chat.
The slides.
Yeah, the slides.
I can send them in the email too. I just like right now also added in the calendar. So what I will do is like in your calendar, add all of the PowerPoints as we go through. And also something I added there that I will add in the chat. It's there was like participants wanting to share the contact information. So we are going to be sharing that as well. So I'll put it in the chat, but also just put it in the calendar and email you. So there's like different ways that you can get that.
Okay, yep, so the answer is yes. All these types of resources will be available to you, and also through the Institute, they have a lot of stuff on their website that you can pull down. And also we look forward, as we always try to do, co-producing, that the resources you use, we want to hear back from you of how you're utilizing it, because an example, what you're doing could help someone else in their context. And so it just keeps on spreading that way. And that's ABCD, that's that network. Any other comments or questions? I mean, I'm trying to say, Mike is talking about the citizenship school model. Yep. Of the community literacy of freedom's teachers. Yeah. So you all understand this. I mean, some of you have a lot of experience with it. Maybe you know, I dealt with this back in 1990 when I worked with Mother Teresa in Calcutta, India, where she was doing ABCD, but she never called it ABCD. You know what I'm saying? I mean, she didn't have the term. So a lot of this you might be already working on and utilizing, and you didn't even know it was called ABCD. You know, you're just doing it naturally in your work. So yeah, so that's how we learn from each other, in the sense it gives us a platform to learn from best practices. Any other comments or questions before we move on? We can circle back. We'll have plenty of time together and we'll be able to talk about it. Okay, Eva's put those
Thank you.
slides in the chat for you.
Oh yeah, I did that.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm like trying to, yeah, so you can see this, the next session. And actually this is like an exercise. So you will be divided into 6 groups, and then 3 of you will be working on a community that has particular descriptors, and then the rest of you, like groups like 3 to 6, will be working on a community with like different descriptors. And so we have like here like groups 1 to 3. This one, there's no particular host, so you can have someone taking notes. You can assign the person that, you know, someone that volunteers for this. But the groups 1 to 3 are going to be looking at this community, and you will have the opportunity to read the details of this community. I believe this is like a slide 52. I will post that in a minute in the chat again. But what I want you to do is like we have the group 1 will be like adding notes here for the thinking part. So there's the way that you have to do it is like go to page 52. Everybody will read the description. You can do that in silence and take, you know, a few minutes. And then you will brainstorm individually in this green box. Just add some things that you might suggest that this community can do based on their description. So take a couple minutes, you know, this is kind of like the think, pair, share type of exercise. So at first you will be thinking on your own in this green box, and then you will share with everyone. So you could take a few more minutes, about, you know, 5 minutes to discuss with everyone, and then another 5 minutes to suggest recommendations together. So I will give you total 14 minutes. Again, I suggest doing like 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. I will let you know in the chat when you're close to those times, but you can manage yourself the time as you like. And then the idea is that in this green box is individual comments, and in this where it says or group recommendations with bullet points, that is like where you will have the group comments. And at the end, we will come together and compare the solutions that you came up with, given the first descriptions, groups 1 to 3, given the second descriptions, groups 3 to 6. So we we'll just like open up the rooms. Like, where are my breakouts? Here. All right. So I'm just going to open it there and give you also the instructions from there as well. So you have them. All right. So it's like 14 minutes. I have to write the, oh, I have like Darlene and Robbie. Let me see, I can add Darlene to groups 6 because there's less people there, and also Robbie to room number 1. And yeah, I think Lamar is assigned already. And we have, yeah. So I need to type.
How far are we behind? 30 minutes?
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, I already made the launch 30 minutes as opposed to 45.
Oh, okay.
So
That'll save us 15 minutes.
yeah, and hopefully, this could, I guess maybe
No, it wouldn't be
5
the
minutes.
worst thing on earth if we ended up carrying something over to session 2,
Yeah, and also I guess that we can cut also on the, towards the end, I guess.
Yeah.
That's fine. We can do takeaways like quickly or something,
Well, I don't think we had a good sense of how long each thing would take,
Well, this is kind of like the way it was. Like we know that in these trainings, we're always running.
everything takes longer than it takes, right?
Well,
Yeah.
we had a much larger class than I think they've ever had
True.
in ABCD. If I'm not mistaken, this might be the largest class,
It's the largest virtual class by
Yeah.
far, John.
yeah, that they've had. And so,
I think the
First
Saturday was
part.
the Saturday was a good idea.
yeah, the first part was, it took longer because we just had so many folks to introduce themselves,
Mhm.
and I mean, we had what, 38?
38, including us, there were 38.
Yeah. Well, but I thought there's a couple out sick, and that's why we're recording.
Oh, yeah, yeah, at least 3, I think, are missing.
Mhm.
One because of snow
Yeah.
and 2 sick.
Next
So a
time,
total of 38 plus us, yeah.
yeah, next time I'm going to just start the recording because I was thinking, oh, I'll record when people are lecturing, but I just forgot. I'm sorry, John. So I will just leave it on, going all the way. So it's recording this because then I forget it. That's my issue.
So it's recording right now.
Yeah, because then I forget to turn it on again,
See, well, we could,
John, it's funny.
But
I just
I
went-
can cut things, I know how to edit videos. But
John,
to do, right? Oh yeah, being recorded. And then, do you want to add anything else from like group 2?
We had ideas as if we were residents, but I think a lot of those got deleted.
No, I think they're still on there. Yeah, we had a few. We had.
Oh, they're back. Some of
Yeah.
them.
It may have just been like a tech issue, but we had a few ideas. I'm specifically working with local leaders and like kind of figuring out who they are to see what would work in the community. We also talked about doing maybe some peace circles since there's some gang violence, and so maybe doing some real community building from that perspective. And then we also talked about, like in a practical sense, maybe working to get some buy-in from the community to reclaim one of those vacated buildings, and maybe encourage some of the local youth to work on cleaning it up, so it's kind of their project, and then making that into a community center where there could be some positive community involvement.
Yeah, and I added a bullet point to the top of our ideas while someone was typing at the bottom. So that perspective of those bullet points might change. But I'm the one that brought up of like, hey, we can't make assumptions of what this community needs. We're offering solutions, but we need to gather information. What do they actually need? What do they want, right? Like this is on paper what we are being shown that is happening, but if we are looking at it not from the community, and even if we are, right, of like how can we gather more information so that these solutions are community based and not us as the saviors of this community.
Yeah, so the approach again might change if you're residents or if you're institutions, but a lot of institutions, it might start with like some of the suggestions that you have, like listening to community leaders and so on. That's if they have a more asset-based community development approach, right? But some of them might just go and start with solutions, right? And just like having their prescriptions, right? And so we will talk about that a little bit later when we talk about institutions. So I like that, you still had some questions about going and talking to the community and try to understand what they would like to see if you were from the institutional perspective. Great, so let's go to group number 3.
Jump in if you guys don't mind. I think that question or that last point, I don't know. I look at it as like you can do it from both. Like there's options, like some of these options we chose, like you can do it from both being, an institution or being a resident of a community. Some of them we came up with were, use free community space or use religious or government centers. Like if there's a school issue with education or something, can we ask the school to use a space to have like a study hall with the students, or like use a religious, group. Let's have like a financial literacy class and try, and whether we're an institution or a resident of that community, I feel like we both have the opportunity to ask, that's, what this is about. Like we're using the assets in our community, like we can tap into those. And then I'll go ahead and pass to anyone else in group 3.
Anyone else in group 3 likes to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I know Benita had shared from her experience that one of the questions I had in regard to this, because of not personally be exposed to a situation like this, is how having a listening session or a gathering, encouraging people to come together, how do you do that? How do you may your heart's in it, and how do you get people to come to something like that? And she had shared, offering incentives, whether it's free babysitting, whether it's a free meal or coffee or something, helps pull people from the community into a gathering place. Who else? There was
that's key.
Yeah, so just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, especially if you're from an institution and you do have resources, right? So we apply for grants, and then all the money is for staff and nothing for the community, right? So how we can maybe hire people in the community to do the community organizing work, right? So they have, they uplift the voices of people that obviously they're connected with in a deeper way. So that's some of the things that, again, institutions can do, use their resources.
One last thing on that. We also talked about finding like a community or resident leader, someone that's, you know, like has pull in the community or neighborhood, someone that people look up to or value their opinion. Tap in with that person, try and build that relationship. So you have like the backing of someone that's within that community if you're not already yourself. So find the leaders in the community and try and get them on board. And that might, you know, like encourage others to participate, and also you have the support from people there, so it might not, you won't seem as much like an outsider if you're not a direct resident.
Yeah, you maybe like hire them, right? Like if you are like dedicating time in that community. Excellent. So now let's like go to this other community. So, or description, I should say. So what was described about, you know, this community?
Starting with group 4?
Four.
Oh, okay. All right. So yeah, I just hopping in for 4. Feel free to correct me, anyone. But yeah, Parkway community, great library, some block clubs, lots of participation, gardens, murals. It's a flourishing, thriving community by description. And some things that came out of group 4's recommendations were some opportunities to build some intergenerational initiatives, bringing seniors and students together, and then also some thoughts about cooperative and collaborative initiatives that could form between different some of these different programs. And then I also just want to name that our group hit a bit of a buffer because there was a bit of a clash in terms of the stories we read. So I want to invite other group members whose recommendations didn't get posted here, if you have recommendations that you just wanted to name before, so that, yeah, it's not just these 2. Check.
Yeah, I was part of reading the wrong story. After looking at this one, I think, you know, a lot of the same thing that even the first group said was listening might be a really important key, to listen to the history of this community, to understand where it's coming from, where it's coming out of, because it very well could be a story of gentrification and losing the history that was once a part of this community that looks like it's flourishing, but is actually something else.
Yeah, that's very important. And for a lot of institutional, you know, investments also result in gentrification. So we have to be very careful. Thanks for bringing that up. Anything else from like this group? So yeah, let's go to like group 5 then.
For group 5, I guess we looked at it in a different lens. I think we thought about it more in like the assets that were there, and we kind of just started brainstorming different resources and things that we could create. So because Parkway, it seems like there's a lot of resources and gardens and things happening. We kind of suggested having like collaborations between different programs and seeing if they could do like some kind of community event together. Especially with the agriculture programs that looks like it's like fostering there. That would be a great opportunity also for young people to get involved with, if that's like learning in their schools about urban agriculture, learning about like food science and different avenues like that, food kitchens. Also, because the community is very successful, we were talking about how we could collaborate with other communities in that region and kind of showing them or like suggesting like different resources that they can also take advantage of in their communities, because it seems like ours is a little bit more like flourishing and doing well. So maybe like seeing how we can contribute to also having more successes around that region or that state. Also like DEI things. So there's a lot of signs that talks about like you are welcomed in our community. All the community members seems to have those signs around their neighborhood. So like kind of seeing what that means, kind of defining that and making sure that we are being diverse and including all the community members in that when we are posting those signs. Yeah, there's just different efforts, after school programs. I think we thought about a lot of different community programs. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in, but yeah.
Anyone else from group 5? Okay, if not, we can hear from group 6. Anyone from group 6?
Sorry, let me.
I think we kind of focused.
Oh,
Sorry.
what's that?
I was just going to say, as for group 6, I think our focus was on kind of brainstorming ideas for how to connect these different groups, organizations, et cetera, that are present in the community. So some of the ideas we had for that were the block clubs incorporating the community gardens and the chickens into providing produce and eggs for some of the block club parties, and also like a farm to fork program to distribute food. With the high school, because there's some academic they're smart kids. I forget the words we're using. I'm struggling to find words, but a tutoring program, and also setting up a basketball league, since the basketball team is a big part of the community, to start teams for elementary or middle school age students, and having tabling events with local businesses. So instead of just saying everyone is welcome, like actually setting up things for people to get talking to each other and introducing each other and finding out what the different organizations that are saying you're welcome here are doing for the community or want to do for the community.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you very much. So the one thing I should say is that the Parkway community is like exactly the same community, right? So we have the idea of like asset-based community development is that we are trying to concentrate on the assets to see what are the resources, again, that people already have in the community, and that might be from community leaders and like the residents, the youth. In this case, it was like a lot of the community gardens, a lot of like artists, and people were like painting murals, and the youth again was like very involved. And then in the school system, we're doing a lot of after school programs and things. So we are viewing this community with a particular lens, right? That might lead us to very particular things, right? So it seems like a lot of this was around food and education, around agriculture and things like that. So we are concentrating on what are the resources, again, what are the assets, and what we can do with that. Obviously, in both communities, like, or it's the same community really, but we start by, you know, talking to people and listening and not coming up with the solutions automatically, right? But what we try to illustrate in this exercise is that after you might do some asset mapping, that's probably the first thing that you should do, discover what are the assets. So in this second example, the groups 4 to 6, the assets were listed there already. And so what the last group, number 6, for instance, what they did, it was like connecting assets, right? That's kind of like you mobilize assets and you connect assets. So that's like another step, right? After you do the asset mapping, you have to do something with that, because just mapping assets is not enough, right? So you have to connect those assets, mobilize those assets to put them into action. And the idea of like, okay, so this is the same community. There's unemployment, there's gangs, there's crime and vacancy, and a lot of things that, again, it don't necessarily might motivate community leaders, right? And there's a lot of communities that do struggle with people, especially institutions, having a negative perspective and always trying to impose that that perspective on that particular community without looking at the assets. And it's not like we're blind, right? Not like recognizing that, yes, there's vacancy and there's unemployment here. But the question is like, okay, if there's unemployment, maybe there's an opportunity to do something in agriculture, or maybe, you know, this community is really good about doing this particular thing. So we already have like after school programs that are amazing. So these kinds of programs will help with like reduction of crime, right? And just like youth being involved in gangs and so on. So the question is like, just like how we can see what is already working and enhance and strengthen what is already working, as opposed to be concentrating on the negative perspective. But something I did like, because again, there was like no much instruction, right? So it was open to interpretation, is that all of you started with like thinking about the residents and thinking about asset mapping. So I think that Bob is, you have like an exercise that is precisely about people think about this, and then later on we'll have a reflection.
Yep. So just an introduction, we're going to be taking about a 30-minute break, but it's not going to really feel like a break because we're going to want you to watch a little video during that period of time. It's about 15 minutes. And it's really the story of Chimamanda Adichie and her story about a single story. And what do we mean by a single story? It's like, well, we tend to define people and places by a single story, and they're truly more complex than that. And she talks about her evolution in doing that. So during your 30-minute break here, when you can get some food and things like that, click on this story. It's about 15 minutes, and then we'll reflect on that when we come back together in a half hour. All right?
Yeah,
Clear,
and
everybody?
I will also post this on the chat in case you cannot access it.
They'll be able to click on it in the chat.
Yeah,
Edith?
so yeah, and so we should be coming back. Is it like just in half hour, but yeah, just 15 minutes or after 15, right? Wherever you are located.
So a question in the chat is, we'll be back together about 10 after. Okay, should be about a half hour. Thank you.
Is there an option for you to play the video or the screen? No.
It'll be in the,
no, I will not like, we will not play on the screen. So I will put it in the chat and you can like watch it on your own while taking your break.
All right, I'm gonna be able to watch it because the laptop I'm on is like really slow.
Yeah, I mean, do you want me to also like play it here? I could play it while people take the break, but if the internet's slow, you might not be able to see it, but you want me to try?
Please, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You have to share the sound. You have to take it and when you do screen share, when you do screen share, you'll have to down at the left-hand corner, there's the, two
Their
things you have to
computer
click.
sound, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a way that that everybody else can turn off the Zoom volume? I know we can mute ourselves, but can we mute the Zoom volume so we can watch the video on another?
Yeah, you could just like mute your computer. That would be the only way to do it.
Now, if we mute our computer, we're still you're not gonna be able to hear me, but I'm gonna hear the speaker.
If you mute your computer, you cannot, hear anything.
Right, and I'm not gonna hear. Anyway,
Or
we'll see.
you could log out and just log back in. And
Yeah, that would be the thing. But
Right, or log off.
you might lose some people. I'll log off.
In Eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in Eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples. And they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria, I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow, we ate mangoes, and we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books, but because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamaralaye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination. They opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this. It saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, live-in domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about their charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family. This single story of Africa ultimately comes, I think, from Western literature. Now, here's a quote from the writing of a London merchant called John Locke, who sailed to West Africa in 1561 and kept a fascinating account of his voyage. After referring to the Black Africans as beasts who have no houses, he writes, "They are also people without heads, having their mouths and eyes in their breasts." Now, I've laughed every time I've read this, and one must admire the imagination of John Locke. But what is important about his writing is that it represents the beginning of a tradition of telling African stories in the West, a tradition of sub-Saharan Africa as a place of negatives, of difference, of darkness, of people who, in the words of the wonderful poet Rudyard Kipling, are half devil, half child. And so I began to realize that my American roommate must have, throughout her life, seen and heard different versions of this single story. As had a professor who once told me that my novel was not authentically African. Now, I was quite willing to contend that there were a number of things wrong with the novel, that it had failed in a number of places, but I had not quite imagined that it had failed at achieving something called African authenticity. In fact, I did not know what African authenticity was. The professor told me that my characters were too much like him, an educated and middle-class man. My characters drove cars. They were not starving. Therefore, they were not authentically African. But I must quickly add that I, too, am just as guilty on the question of the single story. A few years ago, I visited Mexico from the US. The political climate in the US at the time was tense, and there were debates going on about immigration. And, as often happens in America, immigration became synonymous with Mexicans. There were endless stories of Mexicans as people who were fleecing the healthcare system, sneaking across the border, being arrested at the border, that sort of thing. I remember walking around on my first day in Guadalajara, watching the people going to work, rolling up tortillas in the marketplace, smoking, laughing. I remember first feeling slight surprise, and then I was overwhelmed with shame. I realized that I had been so immersed in the media coverage of Mexicans that they had become one thing in my mind, the abject immigrant. I had bought into the single story of Mexicans, and I could not have been more ashamed of myself. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world, and it is nkali. It's a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are defined by the principle of nkali. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and to start with secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state and not with the colonial creation of the African state, and you have an entirely different story. I recently spoke at a university where a student told me that it was such a shame that Nigerian men were physical abusers like the father character in my novel. I told him that I had just read a novel called American Psycho, and that it was such a shame that young Americans were serial murderers. Now, obviously, I said this in a fit of mild irritation, but it would never have occurred to me to think that just because I had read a novel in which a character was a serial killer, that he was somehow representative of all Americans. And now, this is not because I'm a better person than that student, but because of America's cultural and economic power, I had many stories of America. I had read Thailand, Updike, and Steinbeck, and Gateskill. I did not have a single story of America. When I learned some years ago that writers were expected to have had really unhappy childhoods to be successful, I began to think about how I could invent horrible things my parents had done to me. But the truth is that I had a very happy childhood, full of laughter and love, in a very close-knit family. But I also had grandfathers who died in refugee camps. My cousin, Polly, died because he could not get adequate health care. One of my closest friends, Okoloma, died in a plane crash because our fire trucks did not have water. I grew up under repressive military governments that devalued education so that sometimes my parents were not paid their salaries. And so as a child, I saw jam disappear from the breakfast table. Then margarine disappeared. Then bread became too expensive. Then milk became rationed. And most of all, a kind of normalized political fear invaded our lives. All of these stories make me who I am. But to insist on only these negative stories is to flatten my experience and to overlook the many other stories that formed me. The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Of course, Africa is a continent full of catastrophes, the immense ones, such as the horrific rapes in Congo, and depressing ones, such as the fact that 5,000 people apply for one job vacancy in Nigeria. But there are other stories that are not about catastrophe, and it is very important, it is just as important to talk about them. I've always felt that it is impossible to engage properly with a place or a person without engaging with all of the stories of that place and that person. The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. So what if before my Mexican trip, I had followed the immigration debate from both sides, the US and the Mexican? What if my mother had told us that Fide's family was poor and hardworking? What if we had an African television network that broadcast diverse African stories all over the world, what the Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe calls a balance of stories? What if my roommate knew about my Nigerian publisher, Mukhtar Bakare, a remarkable man who left his job in a bank to follow his dream and start a publishing house? Now, the conventional wisdom was that Nigerians don't read literature. He disagreed. He felt that people who could read would read if you made literature affordable and available to them. Shortly after he published my first novel, I went to a TV station in Lagos to do an interview. And a woman who worked there as a messenger came up to me and said, "I really liked your novel. I didn't like the ending. Now you must write a sequel, and this is what will happen." And she went on to tell me what to write in the sequel. Now, I was not only charmed, I was very moved. Here was a woman, part of the ordinary masses of Nigerians who are not supposed to be readers. She had not only read the book, but she had taken ownership of it and felt justified in telling me what to write in the sequel. Now, what if my roommate knew about my friend, Fumi Yonda, a fearless woman who hosts a TV show in Lagos and is determined to tell the stories that we prefer to forget? What if my roommate knew about the heart procedure that was performed in a Lagos hospital last week? What if my roommate knew about contemporary Nigerian music, talented people singing in English and Pidgin and Igbo and Yoruba and Ijo, mixing influences from Jay-Z to Fela to Bob Marley to their grandfathers? What if my roommate knew about the female lawyer who recently went to court in Nigeria to challenge a ridiculous law that required women to get their husband's consent before renewing their passports? What if my roommate knew about Nollywood, full of innovative people making films despite great technical odds? Films so popular that they really are the best example of Nigerians consuming what they produce. What if my roommate knew about my wonderfully ambitious hair braider who has just started her own business selling hair extensions? Or about the millions of other Nigerians who start businesses and sometimes fail, but continue to nurse ambition? Every time I am home, I am confronted with the usual sources of irritation for most Nigerians: our failed infrastructure, our failed government, but also by the incredible resilience of people who thrive despite the government rather than because of it. I teach writing workshops in Lagos every summer, and it is amazing to me how many people apply, how many people are eager to write, to tell stories. My Nigerian publisher and I have just started a nonprofit called Farafina Trust, and we have big dreams of building libraries and refurbishing libraries that already exist and providing books for state schools that don't have anything in their libraries, and also of organizing lots and lots of workshops on reading and writing for all the people who are eager to tell our many stories. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. The American writer Alice Walker wrote this about her southern relatives who had moved to the north, and she introduced them to a book about the southern life that they had left behind. They sat around reading the book themselves, listening to me read the book, and a kind of paradise was regained. I would like to end with this thought, that when we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
What's up, people?
Can anybody hear me? Yes. Okay,
I hear you.
good. Thank you.
Want me to like, yes, share the slides?
Okay,
Or we're still waiting?
so do we think everybody's back? I think it would probably be
Okay, a
useful.
couple minutes.
Yeah, people are coming back slowly. Okay. All right, Evis, I think you can bring the slide back up. Okay, everyone, welcome back. I don't know how many times I've watched this video, and I am equally moved by it every time I see it. And every time I see it, I think about the single stories that I constructed when I was younger. I grew up in northwestern Pennsylvania, sort of what's now northern Appalachia, and a pretty all-white working class community. And I have a lot of single stories of other people. And so what I'd like you to do is, and you can just talk about these as they come to you. And have any of you ever been labeled by a single story personally?
And that Benita is nodding. I'm gonna, should I like take out the slides and have a discussion so we can see each other? It's hard to see people.
Yeah, as a immigrant, many of the time people only hear one story of us, especially when they are talking about undocumented immigrant.
Mhm. Other people, personal stories where you have been labeled by a single story because of where you came from, or?
Well, I could say like a lot. I could say a lot of different things, but one thing I hate the most is systems. And when I say systems, like when you go to the doctors and they write notes about you, right? I recently had surgery earlier this month, and after I woke up and the doctor was asking me questions, and somebody put in the thing that I smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day, and I'm telling this fool, excuse me, he was a fool, but he's made me angry. I said I don't smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day. I smoke about maybe thank you, maybe 16. There's only 20 pack. There's only 20 cigarettes in the in one pack. But the thing was, somebody wrote that, and I'm telling him I don't smoke 2 packs, and he didn't believe me. So it's what people write down, and then you gotta sit there and argue with them because the next person see it and they go by that and put that in your medical history.
Yeah.
Things like that. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I fight
Yeah.
that all the time.
Have any of you ever done this to other people or other communities, labeled them by a single story?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. Hi, this is Sheila Johnson. Yes, I think I have from hearsay.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go and figure it out and understand it myself. And I felt horrible for me to have the nerve to be judgmental of something I truly did not understand.
Mm-hmm.
And inwardly, I apologized, because I had the nerve. who am I to do such a thing as of all the atrocities of people of color, of my color, have witnessed and endured? Who am I to, I would never do that again. I don't care what of any ethnicity that comes into this United States, or anybody, you know, why can't they have a chance for greatness as well?
Yeah. So Sheila, you learned a good lesson by that for yourself.
Absolutely,
to repeat it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it angers me. It angers me. You know, I don't want to get political, but it angers me that, you know, we're born with a blank slate. However, those behaviors are taught, and that's so unfortunate.
Yeah.
And I'm done. I'm done.
Have any of you ever done this to communities, you know, listening, described a community as a single story?
Yeah, so I started out in my position with the Egan office as a tutor, and I was placed into the East Garfield neighborhood here in Chicago. And you know, I had only like my only perspective of that neighborhood was what I had seen on the news, which is, of course, I mean, if you are in Chicago, you know how biased the news is and how they sort of pick and choose how they depict a lot of the neighborhoods here. And so I had certain expectations going in, and they were honestly on the first day, they were kind of confirmed, just because, you know, I get there, there's like trash all over the ground. Like there are a lot of vacant buildings, and like on the surface, yes, those stereotypes held true for me that day. And then when I went back the second time, and I tell this story all the time because I think it's like so important. Like it really changed the way that I think about community. But I noticed that a lot of the houses had put signs up on their fences that said, please don't drop trash in our neighborhood. They'd started putting like tying trash bags to their fences. So it wasn't an issue of the people that lived in that neighborhood or of the community. It was an issue of the city of Chicago doesn't provide trash cans for that neighborhood.
So Sheila, you started to answer the next question, or what are the implications of this? You know, and when you label a community in that particular way, people tend to throw trash there, you know, because they look at the community as trash and they're defining it in terms of its needs. You know, I think of how this played out for me in a long time is I grew up fairly poor, and I reversed this on white wealthy people. I made assumptions about them, you know, that were never very positive until I got inside these homes and started to date their daughters and figured out, these people can be as nice as we are and don't necessarily have to be the snobs like I've described them. So, you know, it works a lot of different ways. So I took a lot from the film itself. I think that line power, when she talked about power, and the power a single story sort of lays on anybody or lays on a community and how those stereotypes play. Most of us have probably worked in communities that have been labeled that way. And a lot of this comes now at the heart of ABCD work, is taking a look at those communities and how we end up defining them. And they often end up being defined by their needs and not necessarily by the strengths and assets of the people who live there and what a community can actually bring. So thank you all. I'm sure there are a lot more stories among us, but a little bit tasked for time. So we're going to get into our discussion now about sort of just some of the basics of ABCD, and let's start sort of laying those out. So like Chimamanda's story, she talked about people being labeled and described, and what they were being described as, they were being described in terms of their deficiencies and stereotyped that way. So when this happens, there are a lot of different results of it. You know, one of the things is that if you call somebody something often enough, or you end up telling them that their neighborhood is a particular way, we begin to internalize that and we begin to believe it ourselves. The relationships in a community end up being damaged. You know, the money that comes into a program or the resources comes into a program come from the outside with very narrow defined programs that deal with problems in those communities. They deal with bad housing, they deal with substance abuse, they deal with people with mental health problems, but they very seldom use the resources of the people of the community. Money gets misdirected. You know, instead of ending up in the hands of the people who actually need it, it ends up in the hands of the professional helpers, you know, the people that come in to serve those communities. John McKnight often talked that if you took everything from the department, all the money that the Department of Human Services has to run programs in the country, and you just handed out that money to poor people, they would be making somewhere around $40,000 a year. And that would probably be of much more benefit to them than the programs that you designed to deal with single issues in their communities.
Who said that? I'm sorry, Bob. Who said that about that?
John McKnight. If you, I think that John Unger mentioned a couple of the books that that John has written, and you'll see those kind of things in there. So the focus gets placed on leaders who magnify these deficiencies. You know, it's like you probably heard, and I don't want to be too political in this whole discussion, but you probably heard African countries described as shithole countries by our past president. You know, those were stereotypes that stick in the minds of people, and people end up playing off of those things. Failure ends up being rewarded. You know, I always used to say that when I wrote a grant for a program or something like that, the worse I described the community I wanted to get money for, the more money I got. If I used an asset approach in that community and started talking about strengths, the funders would generally take a look at me and say, oh, your community is doing just fine. It doesn't need any help, you know? And then, of course, residents experience powerlessness and hopelessness.
Sorry to interrupt again. That's an interesting point about applying for grant funding. You know, I think a lot of us have projects on the table, and do we address that in this at some point? Like,
oh yeah, oh yes, yeah. As a matter of fact, I'll give you some good examples about how I actually did a training for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration on the ABCD approach. And we ended up writing a drug-free communities grant totally based on the assets of a community. And those programs began to be funded around the country. So yes, we can address that.
Great.
Eva, so you controlling the slides? Yeah, this is just language and labels. I'm going to skip over this, but you can see that the larger the print on here, the more times a community has been described that way, or the people living in these neighborhoods that might not be as well off as other neighborhoods. Next. I always answer this question: is the glass half full? Is the glass half empty? The answer is yes. It's both. People in communities have deficiencies and needs, and individuals in communities have assets and capacities. But oftentimes communities get described by their needs and not by their assets and capacities. And I'm always fond of saying is that no need, no deficiency ever solved a problem. What solves problems are the assets and capacities in communities. Next. So a comparison of the ABCD approach and the social services model. When you take a look at these two models, the ABCD approach focuses on assets. The social services model generally focuses on needs. ABCD builds from opportunities. Social services responds to problems. Investment orientation to a charity orientation. When you invest in a community and invest in the people there, you're working off of their assets and strengths. A charity orientation is, we're going to help these people. I think it was you, Amber, that took a look at the way your community was being described in sort of that helping charity way, earlier. There's an emphasis on associations in an ABCD approach. And what are associations? Those are places where people gather, they volunteer, they've got interests in their communities. They range from everything from community associations to political clubs to racial and ethnic associations to church groups, people like that, to an emphasis on agencies. So do you give your resources to associations where the people who really care about an issue get the resources to do it? Or do you give it to organizations or institutions? Focus on community, focus on individuals. The goal of the ABCD approach is to empower the people that live there. The goal in the social services model is to increase the services that are available to them. The ABCD approach, power comes from relationships. Social services model, power comes from credentials. I remember when I first moved to Connecticut, and I was chairing a group in New Haven. And if any of you are familiar with New Haven is the home of Yale University. And I got asked so many questions after chairing that meeting as to how I became chair of this particular group, since I was educated at Penn State and the University of Cincinnati and not in an Ivy League school, and which New Haven was sort of famous for in terms of Yale being the elephant in the room all the time. ABCD approach, people are the answer. Social services model, programs are the answer. People are citizens, people are clients. You know the definition of client? The client as a word has a Greek there. It's derived from a Greek word, and that particular word means people that are down and out, basically on their luck and on their backs. So I have swore from the moment I read that is that I would never call anybody being served or who was engaged in a program as a client. And think about that. Next. So I have, you go back to the needs map, Evis. One more. Okay. Just a quick question to all of you, and maybe you can just shout out. This is I'm in trouble. Well, I think a lot of you have probably seen the needs map where things are described in terms of, there we are again. Now, imagine that this is the only description of your neighborhood. And if this is the way your neighborhood is being described, how does it make you feel? Or what do you think, you know, the effect of that is on a community?
Is that why? Negativity.
Negativity.
Discrepancy, just, yeah.
Yeah, discrepancies.
High crime.
One at a time, again.
I said high crime.
High crime. How do you think the people who live there feel being described like this?
Frustrated, angry.
Frustrated.
Hopelessness.
Angry, hopeless. Depressed. Yep. We had a neighborhood. I worked in Bridgeport, Connecticut for years. Bridgeport is a city that's sort of been down on its luck, you know, and it was a heavy manufacturing place, and all that manufacturing disappeared in the 80s, 70s and 80s. And the city itself as a whole never bounced back. It's got some upscale neighborhoods, but basically it's a poorest city in Connecticut, and has an awful lot of the problems described up here. Yale University used to use sort of Bridgeport as a laboratory to do its pathology studies. And they were doing one on the east side of Bridgeport, which was the highest crime neighborhood in Bridgeport. And the neighborhood association there got together and basically kicked the graduate students from Yale University's public health department and their other departments out of the neighborhood and said, you're not going to do any more studies of our neighborhood. We don't want to be painted as only a pathological place. We want to be painted in terms of our assets. and the capacities. Okay, next slide. So these are the ABCD principles, and John ran through a bunch of these when he talked earlier. I won't expand on the whole thing, but everyone has gifts, no matter who you end up describing, people on welfare, people who are poor, that we all have gifts that need to be built on. ABCD works when everyone draws upon those gifts and utilizes them. I'll give you an example that we use a restorative justice model in our juvenile justice programs. And the first questions we ask when we do panels of young people who have committed crimes is, what do you have to offer? What do you do well? What are some gifts you had? And you find out that they've got gifts of music, they have gifts in sports, they've got things that they can do, and we hook people up with those programs working from their gifts. It identifies and mobilizes the assets of individuals, just like I talked about just recently, builds relationships among community members. All of our best work gets done through the most supportive relationships we can build. It gives community members more roles and power in local institutions and people-led efforts. The more institutions can go to the people that live in the neighborhoods they're serving and find out from those people what they would like to have and how they would like to be served, is much more powerful than a bunch of PhD educated professionals coming into their community and telling them what they need, and then designing programs to meet the needs that they identified. Next. So this is an asset map, and it's the neighborhood asset map. And in the ABCD world, we basically deal with 6 assets. And, they start with the assets of individuals, the gifts that individuals bring. So that's all the things that the people who live in a neighborhood can do. John's going to run you through an exercise later on this afternoon, identifying your gifts, but you do this with people in the community, you do the same thing. It's the beginning of an asset map. And then you've got the associations that are in a neighborhood. And the associations that are in a neighborhood, the organizations that are there are completely voluntary, and it's where people spend their time to make their culture and the people they work with, or to make their neighborhoods or to make their groups stronger through volunteer involvement and getting involved. And then there's there are the institutions in a community, and they consist of, the education, the schools, the universities, the social service organizations, the government in those communities, people like that. They can be treasure chests, and they can have almost locked doors to the community. And it's important to find those organizations that are treasure chests. We had schools in Bridgeport, for example, that they opened up at 8:30 in the morning, they closed at 2:30 in the afternoon. And if you ever had a community group in there and they touched an eraser or disturbed something in a classroom, there would be a grievance filed. And then we had other schools that opened at 6 o'clock in the morning, where people could bring their children if they were going to work early in the morning. And they were open till 10, 11 o'clock at night. And they did language, English as a second language for the people who lived in the community, and all kinds of other programs. One being a treasure chest, one being closed to the community. I'm sure you can identify the same types of organizations in your communities. The fourth asset that's in a community are the financial resources and the resources that are there, and it's important to identify those. The fifth are really the physical space in a community. It's like the parks, the open spaces, the spaces that are used to do community good. And then there are the community stories, the stories that we end up building off of. And when we start talking about asset mapping in next week's session, it's important to map all of these things that are in the community and then figure out how they get mobilized to move forward. Next. So the one before that, Evis?
Oh, there's like one more.
I think there was one right before that. Yeah, so you can just see that we're community driven, but it requires that residents get involved in their associations, in the institutions that are there. You know, the most powerful programs that you can provide for people are programs that they themselves have had a major hand in designing, you know, and putting together. And the work of associations, you know, is important in that process. And I don't care what the association is, you know, whether it's a political or association or maybe even a youth baseball group. I worked with an association in Portland, Maine, a little league, and the main thing of that group was that all the baseball players went out and did things for the communities. They worked at food lots, and they worked in doing community service, and they did all kinds of things like that in the community. And that's not what they were designed to do, but anywhere people gather in associational life, they're strengths for the community. All right, next, Avis.
Now we are like just like talking about how they have been achieved in the field of like thinking about social services, but also thinking about community development more broadly. So like in the 60s, there was a lot of movements like thinking about liberation theology, thinking about social justice back into the church, thinking about service for low-income individuals, and just like giving and being a good neighbor, of course, and a good Christian. In Chicago, you have like Saul Alinsky, who was a community organizer, and he actually traveled all over the United States as well, organizing people, mostly workers, because like the way that before we had like unions, right? So a lot of unions, and that has declined quite a bit with like the industrialization of many cities. But the organization mostly happened through like employers, and you might think about that relationship of let's say like capitalism, right? You have the employer or the owner of capital, thinking about land, labor, and the financial means, and you have like the workers. So that's a lot of organization from this perspective to give like power to workers and organize that way. And also thinking about Chicago, because like, you know, the asset-based community development was like founded in Chicago, in Northwestern University, although right now it has moved like a few years back to DePaul University. But Jane Addams was someone that she actually won the Peace Nobel Prize for her work around just providing services in low-income neighborhoods, particularly of immigrants. So, but this is like more like in the 20s. So it comes before Alinsky's time, in where she was like basically a rich woman that at that time a lot of highly educated women were not allowed to actually being in academia or have like a job per se. So many of them were like giving services to the community, and many of those were about health and just like hygiene, and picking up trash, fighting for people having like clean water. A lot of them did mapping in communities to map public health issues or issues of unemployment and things like that. A lot of it was a little bit, you know, based on what were some of those negative things in terms of like the mapping, but again, they were embedded in communities, so they will have like the homes of these women to be located in the old neighborhood, creating their own institution and actually creating their own ways of actually listen to communities as well, and advocating for their rights, mostly around the elite crisis. So if we go a little bit back to the 60s, right? Because we have like in the 20s, there was like very little government intervention. Then in the 30s, after the Great Recession, we have like really the creation of the federal system. So there's a lot of more social services, and then the creation of the just like the banking system didn't exist, the Federal Reserve before that, or financial systems as well, were out of reach of most. So you have like federalization of like many of these programs. And at the same time, you have government becoming bigger, right? And making, unfortunately, a lot of decisions that were based in institutionalized racism. So you have like redlining, which like was instituted by the bank loan corporation, but it which was like a group in government, and this was like facilitated with banks and actually, like, if you didn't know this, is an interesting fact. Like John McKnight, which is the founder of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute, he actually coined the phrase of redlining. So he was like in the Human Rights like Commission in Chicago, and a lot of people were actually talking about this in communities, and this was like a term that actually stuck, obviously because the communities that where there was a lot of immigrants and a lot of Blacks and people who were low income or workers were put a red line on the map, and there was like other types of grading, thinking about where the middle class lived, where the higher class live, and another class, so 4 colors, and that determined like lending in communities. So a lot of the disinvestments, obviously, that happen in communities was for inability of people to be able to take loans or repair their homes, having accepting landlords, resulting later on in actually urban renewal, which was like until the 70s. And then we have like a changing perspective after the 70s, in where we have more requests for participation. So the federal government, after got rid of like urban renewal in 1974, they started to create what we know as like community development block grants in 1974. And a lot of the funding that organizations like yourself might obtain are through CBG. That are like very flexible type of funding. So the idea was like to decentralize the role of government and have more organizations, nonprofits, asking for these funds and doing more community engagement on the ground. So now the federal government, obviously, in a lot of the just of these programs, they actually require that you do some kind of community engagement, recognizing the mistakes from the past. So in all of this, as I was talking about, like, government is like having this role. There's like a field of study that it has like Bob was mentioning, like how professionals, right? People with credentials are many of the people doing what we call like the community development, because in a way they tend to be like the intermediaries between write those grants and get those grants for community purposes, right? So we have that, again, that role of like community engagement and making community better have fall in a lot of nonprofits, especially, as I said, with the process of after the 70s. And some people might call that neoliberalization, right? And where you have like government is smaller, everything is outsourced. Now the housing, we have less public housing, and we have like more organizations building housing in their own communities, and people kind of like self-organizing in neighborhoods. And so in a way, we have like created the profession of doing that community organizing, of providing housing, of providing health, and all these things that kind of have been externalized. But even though participation is a requirement for most of these funds that you might obtain from government, obviously it's important to think about participation as more authentic than that. And there has been a lot of like criticisms about, what are the requirements? Because we have a lot of what we call checklist participation, right? So checklist participation is that, yes, I have to have like a public hearing, and then you go to the public hearing, and then you send an email to your stakeholders, and then you do X, Y, and Z, and then you just go down the list just to the minimum requirement. And I know that, if you're here, you're not doing that, but that's like a lot of like institutions, including academia, including founders, including governments, operate in that way. So what is the minimum that we can like get by, right? To say that we did some participation, some community engagement. So again, this like a slide is going back to the idea that a lot of the professional organizers, and many of you have been actually even have that title, right, of community organizing, are sort of like the intermediaries in a way of thinking about, decision makers. I usually in government and the residents. So there's a lot of people who are in institutions that are professional organizers are also connectors, right? So it's kind of like raising the voices of people in the community and communicating that to governments or like to other like legislative bodies in order to create changes and so on. So this like a slide looks at, well, I think that I skipped one, that's right. So here we have like the ladder of citizen participation. And just to let you know, I can share with you later on like a paper that I wrote with another colleague at Asset-Based Community Development Institute that shows like different ladders. So at the time when, the civil rights movement, a lot of people are thinking about, how communities can gain more power. And during that time, there was obviously a lot of riots, or you might call it rebellions, and there are a lot of like contestation in cities, because again, people were very upset, and the government started to listen and started to put a little bit more power in those communities through funding and so on. So there's a lot of ladders of citizen participation. Sherry Hanstein is one of those ladders, but there's like tons that you can find. And it was not only in the United States, but there's like a global movement where you can find these. So Sherry Hanstein was, she worked for HUD, or the Housing Urban Development. And what she was noting at that time, people were starting to think about, okay, participation is important. But the problem is that they were not taking it seriously. So they started to, like, if you can see in this ladder, like people go get more power up the ladder, right? So you have like 3 ranks. For example, non-participation. That's what she called about like manipulation or therapy. So we might have, let's say someone in government, in her case, it was like through HUD, right? They might just manipulate people about what they want. No, this is like what you should want. You should want urban renewal. And this is why, right? And therapy is like they will listen to the people, but it's kind of like a therapist, just like listen to it, listen to your problems. But in this case, nothing happened. And then another thing that they might do in degrees of tokenism is just like informing the public of something, but it's not a two-way communication. It's just like I'm telling you information, but really I'm not even consulting, which is like the next rung in here. So consultation is that I might consider some of the things that you say. And consultation, we might say, well, I'll do a survey, and then I kind of consult the community. And then placation is like, maybe I'll give you something. So if you're asking for something, I'll be like, yeah, okay, I'll give you this like little win in your community. And then we get into the actual citizen power, which is like we're actually creating partnerships with people. And finally, is delegated power. So it's not placative, because people actually are making the decisions, right? So you might have an advisory committee that is like actually managing the money. So a big example of this is like participatory budgeting, right? So that might be an example of like the community might decide in where to spend this particular money. And of course, in all models, there might be some opportunities for manipulation and all these other less participatory ways. But again, this is just kind of like a conceptual framework of the idea that we have to be thinking about how people can have more delegated power. And, you know, it's very clear as we can see this from government, but we can also see it from our organizations. So later on, we will be talking about power. You can look at your programs and the things that you do, how many residents actually have the decision-making power on this, or sometimes you consult them and things like that. And so in terms of like thinking about, you know, planning, the first part that we do anytime is just like thinking about scanning and assessment. So a lot of the asset mapping might also happen in this, although it might happen at all these stages. So you may have the stage of planning. I think that one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is that they do the asset mapping and the scanning and assessment of assets, but they don't move into more of the planning of like, what are we gonna do with those assets? They don't move into the implementation, right, phase. And then also evaluation is very important in the, just generally speaking, the planning process to like see like what we did it work? And something we wanted to share with you is just like, you might have for all these different stages of planning, some tools that you can use. As I said, asset mapping, as you can see, is repeated in each one of this. But, you know, like brainstorming or like the wall of wonder could be really good for scanning. They might have like some strategic planning that I'm sure that you have done with your organizations, or thinking about consensus workshops. Then we might have other ways to think about how the community can have more power or influence. And obviously thinking about like how we actually improve what we have done. So in a way, this is, you might think about it a little bit of as a spectrum more than a ladder per se. And I just wanted to direct you to this link, which, you know, I can put in the chat later, but there's a lot of more tools, and you can click on these tools and say what they are, how we can do engagement using these different techniques. And a big point here is that, you know,
and also we got to put the data up
ABCD is about relationships and about creating, right, with the community. And then we're going to have an exercise with John, and this is a very fun exercise. And John, do you want to share your own screen?
Yeah, I thought this is a time for a 5-minute break. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
Okay, so let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. It's 53. So let's come back at 57. Okay, wherever you are, it's 2:53 on Eastern time. Let's come back at if it's 2:57 on Eastern, be 1:57. Whatever, wherever you are, but come back on the 57.
Figure it out.
Right.
Thanks.
All right, so hopefully everybody's back. I'm sharing the screen here. So as we learned, and this is important as we do this exercise for us to keep this in mind, Bob went over the fact that everyone has gifts. That's an ABC. The principle, ABC works when everyone draws upon those gifts, and it really, the power comes in not credentials, but relationships. And so that's what we're going to be talking about now. Also, we talked about how the gifts are individual, and then coming together, we develop connections or networks. Those are associations. And then institutions are more formalized in the sense of those connections, networks, and the combination of those gifts. And that's what I say community. Johann Hari, in one of his books called Chasing the Screen, talks about addiction. And he said that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And that's what we're going to talk about. How do we connect? How do we develop those relationships through ABCD? Now, I'm going to skip it forward here. So what we're going to talk about is how do we get folks to participate? How do we have those basic engagements? And so part of that is what we call 101s, listening sessions, but not just calling a meeting and just inviting folks to the meeting, but also, in essence, what we want to do is have it in as far as 101s, looking at the heads, the hearts, the hands aspects, the gift inventory of an individual, drawing that out, using techniques like motivational interviewing, things like that, asking those questions to draw people out. So in 101, the most effective way to unlock the power of people in any neighborhood or community is through these learning conversations. And again, it's better if it's one-on-one than one on a group. Although you can still deliberate, do deliberative dialogues in a group, but it's better to do a one-on-one. And from these conversations, these things are purposeful conversations that's designed in order to not only for you to discover a person's gifts, but probably and passions, but also equally important, that person discovering their own gifts and passions. They may not realize it, or if they do, they may never have articulated it. And so through these one-on-one conversations, these are empowering conversations of learning of the person's gifts as far and passions. Now, one of the things that you can think of this is, we hear a lot, especially during political season, about polling. So many people think this way or think that way. So polls give us insight to what people think. And then focus groups, when you get people in a group and you start asking them questions, you can get an idea why they think what they think. But these one-on-one conversations really tries to go to the heart of how people think what they think and why they think. It's how they think. And so there are 5 goals that we want to accomplish on these intentional learning conversations on one-on-one. First is deepen the relationships. You want to provide that space and that opportunity where existing relationships or building new ones can become deeper, where you have more of a connection. Also, you want to discover the passions and gifts of someone, what they have to offer, what they're willing to share. Why are they willing to share? What's the passion that drives them? And then you look at you identify the mutual interest. You learn what other people have in common. You connect the dots. You might realize ways to involve that individual in connecting. Oh, well, I know so-and-so has this. Have you thought about coming together, connecting those dots. And ABCD practitioners are really connectors in a community. Invite engagement, allow a person to be able to exercise their gifts, their passions that align with the work of a community. And it's important that you make the ask. So often for the clergy in this group, you all know that if you make an announcement in the bulletin or to the congregation, hey, we need so-and-so we need somebody to serve on the vestry. Well, you may get the ones that you normally always get that volunteer, the 5% that do almost everything. But what the power is if you go and you ask an individual, hey, have you thought about serving on the vestry? Have you thought about being part of this ministry? Have you thought about being part of this community organization? That personal invite is so powerful than that general blanket, hey, anybody interested, come talk to me. Because you're empowering that person, you're believing in that person, and that person starts saying, wow, maybe I can do this. This might be something I would be interested in. And then you connect with others. Through these conversations, you connect others beyond just the current conversation, connect them into their community, connect them with others in their community. So these one-on-ones, why would passions matter? Well, in order to understand what drives a person, what gets them up, as Simon Sinek would say, the why, you start with the why, so to speak. That's what really drives an individual, motivates to act. And so in order to try to understand, if you understand their passions, their concerns, their hopes, then you can better help them connect those dots in their own life in connecting their gifts with their passions to really realize that and be able to flourish at purpose in their life. And so hopes include what someone is excited about, what they see in the future. What is it that they really get in the so-called flow, that they're just really enthralled with it. Some of their gifts of what they enjoy to do, and how this can directly impact their community and others. So this is what motivates. So learning conversations helps us learn to make a person what makes them tick. What are they willing to act on? So you can see here, most people are motivated by three things: hopes and dreams, what they want to happen and see in the future; concerns and fears, what they do not want to happen or fear will happen; and then their gifts and talents, what they can contribute and what they can offer. I'll go and tell you, in today's world, a lot is emphasized on number 2, concerns and fears. And you have forces that actually prey on individuals' fears and concerns that creates division. But as ABCD practitioners, we don't just stop there. We also incorporate the hopes and dreams and the gifts and talents. And it reminds me of sometimes someone will come up to me, either as a state senator or as a priest, and they will complain about something. I mean, they will just say, there's a problem here, and I'm just not happy about this, or what's going on either in this church or in this community, put it whatever context. I'm sure you've had people like this. They can really blast you. But I always like doing the ABCD on them. So after they finish explaining the problem, I can say, Ms. Smith, you have really identified this issue very, very well. You've explained it, you articulated it well, you've analyzed it well, you've examined it, and I am really interested in now listening to your solution. How can we fix it? What are some ways we can fix it together? Well, 9 times out of 10, they look like deers in a headlight. Look, they give me this look like, well, you're supposed to fix it. And sometimes I'll get that. Well, no, you're supposed to fix it. You're the priest, or you're the senator, or you're the community organizer. You're supposed to fix it. And once again, you look at this, and again, you emphasize the resources. Well, you're right. I want to be part of the solution, but you have really studied this a lot. And so I really need your help in order for this, so we can do it together. And so that's when you start looking, what are some of the hopes? What do you see this changing in? What could it be? What's the dream of what it could be? You explain what you don't like about it or what you fear about it, but what could it be? And then, okay, what talents, what things do we need? What resources do we have available to us right now, collectively, that we can get started on this? And so that's what these individual conversations really, you try to draw that out on an individual. So you can see here in this chart, you got gifts and passions on the left. What do your friends or family tell you that you're good at? These are some questions you can ask on the 101. What are three favorite hobbies? What do you like to do? What skills are you really, you're good at that you think of? Things like that. And then the passions is, what do you care about? What concerns you? What, as far as your community, what would you like your community to look like in 5 years? What's the biggest concern that you have that could be happening in 5 years? And what can we do about it together? Now, one thing I've learned in recovery coaching is, don't use the word, no one likes to be should on, and I mean should. I said should. People don't like to be should on. You should do this, you should do that, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. Instead, you want to use language where it's empowering, like questions. What could we do? What could we do to work on it to get started? And then on the right side, you can see the issue feedback. What ideas do you have about working on it? What concerns do you have about our work together? What are some of the positives and hopes? And then you talk about associations. What other groups do we need to include? Do we need to form an association? Do we need to connect? How do we connect people and get their gifts kind of pulled together? The possibilities, what are those possibilities when we bring people together? Who would you consider attending our next meeting that may not, you would think on the surface that person would never attend a meeting like this, but why don't we ask? Why don't we see? How might they become interested in attending a meeting to talk about how we can work on this? And then connections. Who else do you know we should learn more about? Who else can you think of that might care about this work? And really start broadening the circle, including being more inclusive. So the basic tools for community organizing in the interviewing method is this one-on-one and a more intentional, more in-depth level of looking at hands, head, heart, gut, and feet. And so, for example, with the heart, what do you care about? What do they have a personal stake in? The gifts of the heart. What do they care deeply about? Okay. And then the head. What do you think? How do you see things? How do you think about these situations? What's your view? What's your perspective on the world and on the community or on this particular issue or this particular problem? And you want to get that. And then the hands. What are some activities that you're involved in? What are some skills? What can you do? What are some things you've done before that you would be willing to share with others? Maybe even teach others to do, from knitting to crocheting to cooking to whatever. What are the hands of the heart? And then the gut is what feeds their motivation? What gives them purpose? What inspires them? What gives them that motivation where they're not going to quit, that resiliency, they keep on going? I was thinking an example of this, I was watching a documentary on Ulysses S. Grant. Of course, led the Union troops during the Civil War, became president. And at the end of his life, he was destitute. They didn't have a pension for presidents at the time. He was destitute, and he had cancer. He was dying, but he didn't want to leave his family poor. So he wrote his autobiography, and there was a publisher that was willing to give him 10% of whatever the books would be sold when he died. But he was, so, only 10%. But of all people that came to his rescue was Mark Twain. And Mark Twain told him, President Grant, if you get this biography finished, I will publish it and I will give you 75%. Grant was motivated even throughout the pain and suffering of cancer as he was struggling to finish that autobiography. But what motivated him was his family, his love of his family. He did not want to leave them destitute. He was willing to take whatever endurance of his last breath to finish it. And he did, and he died, I think it was like a week or so after, and his wife got over $500,000, so was able to take care of the family. But that's what the gut that keeps them going. And then the feet, the hope for the future. What plans are you making? What plans could you make? Also with your family, your friends, your community, how do we hustle? How do we make that happen? Okay. All right. So, and I'll stop here to ask if there's any questions on that. And we're going to do an exercise. We're going to break into our groups on one-on-one. And what I would like for you to do is to, if you look at that chart, and I'll bring it up here again, and we may not take the full 15 minutes, depends on the time, but we want to give each of you a chance to talk to each other, to learn from one another. And so think of it as you're exercising that you're going to do this in your own community, your own setting, one-on-one. And so your partner that you have, ask the questions of, the gifts that a person has. Try to draw that out from them. And then the passions, what motivates them? What makes them excited? What gets them up in the morning? What's their purpose? And then it'll talk us about the issue feedback that we went over and the associations that they have. You'd be surprised. Well, the network, the networks that we all have and how many people we touch if we really start inventorying those types of networks. What are the possibilities? What could this situation look like within a year to 2 years to 5 years? And then what additional connections would you think of that you'll need to draw in and bring in order to make it happen? So let me go back to that chart again. This right here. If you take a picture of it on your, like a screenshot, or you take your phone and take a picture of it or whatever, this can help you in your conversation as you're doing an inventory with your partner. And we'd like for you to spend half the time, like 6.5 minutes or 7 minutes with your, drawing it from your partner, and then switch. Let your partner then draw it out of you as far as filling this. And we like to have some of you to report back what you've discovered, even about, from your partner that you discovered, some commonalities, some connections, some thoughts, but even what you discovered about yourself that you may not even known about, that through those conversations, you're starting to discover, yeah, I have that interest too. I got that passion and I didn't really realize it, or I couldn't articulate it as well as you did. So you understand what we're trying to do here? You're practicing what you're going to be doing what we would encourage you to do in each of your communities as you go back this week, maybe you can find a couple for your homework, one-on-ones that you can talk to and do this inventory on, and then come back and report it. But right now, we want you all to exercise on each other, this aspect. So any questions, comments, or anything you want to bring up? Everybody, either you all dropped off or you're asleep or things are okay. Okay.
Here, all checked in.
All right, good deal. All right, so Evis, if you could break everyone into breakout groups of 2.
Yeah.
And we'll give them what, 14 minutes? I mean, I don't know where we are as far as time.
Yeah, you have until like, I guess, until 40 to finish everything.
Okay, till 4:40 or 3:40 or 2:40 or whatever.
Yeah, like 20 minutes to finish everything.
Okay, so everything as far as even report back or just them coming back and then we start the reporting?
Yeah, it's supposed to be everything, but you can
Okay,
make a little
so we
longer.
got 7, so we're gonna do 14 minutes and it'll be 7 per person, okay? And just try to come up as much as you can. Fill that box up, as much as information as you can, because
Yeah, in the slides, there's actually no space so if you want to replicate, you can do that, but I didn't prepare individual slides.
Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and we'll be back in 14 minutes.
There's still people in the rooms. And yeah, Tabata was there by herself, so I'm not sure what happened there.
All right, is everybody back or they're just coming back or let's see. Nope, they're not back yet.
There they come.
Not nearly enough time.
All right, John. Yeah, you start having those discussions and boy, you just could talk forever.
Yeah, so this definitely is an example where you want to be able to set up more than 15 minutes with a one-on-one. So this is just more of a practice of trying to get a taste of it. So who would like to share some of the things that you came up with on the one-on-one? I mean, there's a lot of things you could have filled in and you only had 7 minutes per person, but the gifts, the passions, the issue feedback, associations, possibilities, connections, a lot to cover within very short period of time. But was there anything that bubbled to the top? Maria?
Yeah, it was really a nice time and a nice opportunity with Jonathan and myself. So we didn't have enough time. So we were able to talk about our gift and our passion. And one interesting thing is that we share a lot of things in common. I was highly excited when we were having that conversation. We share a lot of things in common, like his gift of, people-oriented person. He likes inclusion. He's a charismatic person. And then the talent that he brings to the work is like organizing, outreaching, and he's passionate about his passion is like experience, like And then also his passion, he care more about people. He's people-oriented person, and I share the same with him. His concerns are lack of like understanding, like issue of class, having superiority over others. So these are his concerns. And for future, he wants the community to be more engaging, and then more community involving and the participation, And then he wants to take with what he wants to take from here to including his work is the asset-based community development, everything we have talked about, like the community engagement and all that. And I'm so excited that we almost share the same like ideology about the whole stuff.
Yeah, so you saw a lot of alignment in your own passions and things like that. Well, that's fantastic. Now I got it on the side here, fire tablet, but I know that's not the person.
Oh, that's Chanel.
Oh, Chanel. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had to log in from another device.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Actually, Joshua and I we both answered all the questions. We just kind of hit the questions, answered them, wrote those information down, and then we kind of had a conversation afterwards. So, hey, Joshua's got some great things here, great gifts, very social, inclusive. He loves outdoor music and volunteering, passionate about his family. He's concerned what immigration will look like in 5 years. Process for the feedback is, info to share since he's in Omaha, and he is connected with organizationals that for youth, and empathy is one of his skills, and so he wants to see what understanding what people's experiences are and kind of listen to them, and then see how he can use his skills to further whatever it is that they're looking to do as well as himself, and how to handle the situations. He's going to be looking more at the model that we're working with and getting more details to see how to implement it.
Fantastic. So, and I want to, if there's someone else I want to draw out, but I just want to mention this. So this can be implemented not in a sense that you just go ahead and call someone up and ask them to interview them. The object of this is really develop those connections. This is a tool that, yes, you can draw out and do an inventory of their gifts and help you with, help with the connecting of the dots, but it's really a tool to develop relationships. So one of the examples that I'll give them, I use this, is when I first, I was relocated, or I was brought into another church. As I mentioned, I have 3 churches of 3 different denominations. The one I took on with the United Methodist, they did a feeding program. Most churches have ministries, feeding ministries, community kitchens or whatever. And I can remember during Joys and Concerns, they would lift up how many people they served and how much food they cooked. And, they give a report, and they're very proud of that. And I'd say, oh, that's fantastic. And then I said, how many people did you talk to? Oh, no, Pastor, we were too busy. We didn't have time to talk. I mean, we had 2 turkeys and we had mashed potatoes. We were serving, we were cleaning up. We didn't have any time to talk. And I said, well, why not? I mean, why didn't you take the time? So now we implement the one-on-one conversations. We always have people that not only serve and stuff, but we also have individuals that will sit down and just have conversation and talk and develop relationships and connections. And so even places like that where you would normally have gatherings, how can you implement a one-on-one conversation? Bringing this as a tool to sit down and ask people about their passions, about their gifts, about what they're interested in, what their hobbies are, things like that about them, and have those conversations. And what we found was, we found that it built community where people started helping each other, and there was no distinction between those serving the meals and those eating the meals, that basically it became a community meal. Everybody sat down, everybody was working together, everybody was having conversation together. That's asset-based community development. And if you have that mentality that philosophy that every person, no matter how much, as Mother Teresa would say, the Christ in that distressing disguise, how much that person is, if every person is a resource and every person has gifts, and your challenge is to help that person discover it, or you discover, or someone discover those gifts, you won't get the attitude, oh my goodness, here comes John again. He's all he does is run his mouth. If you can take a nugget, if you know they're a resource, then you're going to be more engaged to seeking that. And so that's what the one-on-one conversations are about. Anybody else want to share what they found about themselves? Maybe as you talk, you realize something, or as your partner was talking, you realize something in your life that you had that you didn't realize, in, something. Anybody had any discoveries?
John, this is Laura. I'm going to just say, just from the experience, is learning to be an active listener and really listening versus jumping ahead and trying to connect with what someone's saying, because then you're not really listening at the moment. So really taking it and paying attention, I thought was real important.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laurie. Absolutely. Yep. And I see Mike. Mike, you have your hand up, I think.
Yes. So in terms of connections or skills, we all had some sort of passion around food and around, feeding people and, cooking. But the other part of our group that was very interesting is that there were 3 of us that actually ended up, we were the odd numbered group. And so we had to do a lot of collaborative listening, right? And a lot of collaborative participation to kind of make sure that we had a generative conversation and hit at least a few of the different questions. Check.
Oh, fantastic. And Mike, I got to tell you, one of your gifts is you have a radio voice. I don't know if you know that, but you have a fantastic voice. So that's one of your gifts, just of discovery there. All right. We have Sheila. You have your hand up?
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I had the pleasure of being connected with Alyssa from Minnesota. And we connected very well together. And it was like a mirror image of vanilla me, and of chocolate her. So we really communicated very well. I found some things about her passions are also some of my passions. And who knew that 1,300 miles away or more, that we are sharing the same passions for the work that we do. In addition, I shared one of my secrets with her of what I'm doing right now. And I've only told one other person on this earth, and she is on this call. But I appreciated her and her 5-year, wanting to have more grassroots work and things of that nature and bringing that into her job. I just thought that was just phenomenal. She is amazing, and I appreciate meeting her.
Well, things must have gone very well if you shared something that was a secret that only one other human being on this planet knows, and that conversation must have went very well with that trust. That's fantastic. Well done.
Can I just say, yeah, Sheila is the best, and I'm very envious of her old school Rolodex. So.
Hey, if the electric goes out, it still works. That's what I see it right there.
Yeah. And we were already sharing books, and yeah, she was great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, anyhow, we're going to practice some of this in the future, some sessions. We're going to come back to this. But this week, if you could maybe identify 1 or 2 people, try this on them, okay, as your homework. And we'll come back next week on Saturday, and I'd like to have you report out what you discovered. So pick 1 or 2 people, take this tool, set up a one-on-one conversation, go through it, and see what you discover, okay? All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Bob to kind of wrap it all up here and send us on our way.
Okay. Well, it's funny when I do this exercise, John, and everybody here, I often tell a story that I'm the worst person to sit next to on an airplane or on a bus, because I'm doing hand, head, and heart with you as you're sitting next to me, because I want to get to know you, and there's nothing better. I think, as a relationship builder than this particular exercise. I mean, it just works very, very well. So in terms of wrapping up, let's do a little evaluation of the day. Evis has put a thing up here. I'm going to ask the question. I'd like some of you to respond verbally to the question, but also you can use your tool and sort of pick out a box and write in there, what you thought as your response to the question. So the first thing I'd like to ask you is, what did you like about today? I mean, what worked for you? Anybody?
Do you want us to tell you or write it? What do you want?
I want both. You can start writing, but I'd also like a couple people to speak verbally so that we can have some interaction.
One thing that I just want to point out really quick, I think as facilitators or hosts, you guys have done an amazing job setting up the Google slide in a very collaborative space so that we can see each other's work and use it to guide our conversation. So like kudos and props to you. It's been fun to see things get populated, and now we can go back next week and still take a look at everything. So great. Thanks for setting that up.
Great.
I would like to say I like the one-on-one. I actually think I do excellent one-on-one, but I guess what y'all taught me enhanced my skills that I already had. So out of the whole workshop today, that was my favorite part, learning about the one-on-one.
All right, great. Anybody else? I see some thumbs up.
Hi.
I'm sorry.
You can go. I'll go next.
Okay. No, I was gonna say I really enjoyed working in the groups on the two cities project. I was in the group with I'm so sorry. I have a terrible stutter today. I was in a group with David, who sort of like mentioned that we were thinking about the community from sort of like a swoop in and help perspective rather than talking to them. And I never would have thought of that, like if I were just left to my own devices. So it was just nice to like get so many different perspectives kind of in that same group and like really to challenge the way that I was thinking.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
I like the breakout groups.
Sorry.
Breakout groups and hearing. Sorry about that. I like the breakout groups and hearing everybody's opinion within the groups.
Ooh, that sounded like another radio voice, John.
I get it all the time.
Yeah, I bet. Okay.
So I wanted to add that I love the structure, the organization of the program. Is kind of engaging, and everybody gets involved into activity, and it helps the program to kind of resonate with like individuals and didn't get bored. So
all right, thanks, Maria. Sheila.
Oh, I was writing mine in the chat. However, I enjoyed the breakout rooms and the one-on-ones. And I also said what's so endearing or fascinating is that we're all striving for the same thing, and the total concept for change to making the neighborhoods and letting people know that they have things within themselves, how they can make a difference in their own lives, in their own spaces. So I'd like to thank you all, the whole team, for such a wonderful and interesting, because I get bored quickly. I was not bored one time today. I was enlightened, and I thank you.
Over 5 hours, that's quite a statement.
Yeah, so, thank you.
All right. What didn't work for you today? What didn't you like or, think could be improved?
My hand down.
We've got thick skin, so you can tell us anything.
I'll say just like as an introvert with some sensory processing concerns, watching a video on lunch is just like a no-go. I needed the half hour of just silence. to really be present, I think, outside of that. So
you needed some time just for yourself rather than watching a video during that time.
yeah,
Okay.
which I took. I'll watch the video later.
Oh, okay, good.
Mhm.
Other people?
Yeah, thank you so much for the printouts or making it accessible so we could, be able to have that. I think just in the future, it'd be good to have them ready and loaded so we can have them to follow along right away.
Okay. Have the printouts earlier.
I agree with that because I have a printer. I don't know how to connect it, but it was wonderful. I like, because I'm a visual learner. I need to make notes on the sentences that are provided for me, but that would be a great idea. That's a great idea.
Yeah, we can send those in advance.
Yeah, we can do that.
The thing that bugged me was some mics were on when people were talking, so I couldn't fully hear everything that was getting across. So I don't know if there's a way to like mute everyone during a particular presentation or part of it. But other than that, I thought it was great.
Jonathan, there is a way we can do that. And I think that's a good suggestion because, we heard a lot of background noise occasionally. So.
Yeah.
Okay, on a pre-survey, y'all asked what can we do for you asked what can y'all do for us to make, I guess, something to the effect to make this a good experience. So I said plenty of breaks. I just don't think we had enough breaks, or the breaks that we did have wasn't long enough. Me being a former teacher, I learned that you need breaks when you on a screen all day teaching. So I asked me that in the survey, and I just feel as though I didn't get that.
All right, thank you.
I had difficulty every time you would talk about we don't have enough time. As a trainer, we've done some experiments with biofeedback, and when people hear that, they become aware of how much time and stay away from the content. And that if you have time, don't tell us, just just go on. Yeah.
Okay, we'll keep our mouths shut, Patty.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, let's go to the next question. What new insight did you gain today, that you learned? About ABCD? Okay.
It was a lot of good stuff I learned about ABCD. The insight actually was my sentiments exactly, and I love it. And the participation, the connecting, everything that you guys are doing I think is exactly what is needed. And I'm so grateful to have been selected to participate in this workshop. Thank you.
Darlene, it was great to have you. Thank you. Anyone else? Particular insight you learned today?
The power of the story. That people are more than just what their label is or what they see on the outside.
Right, absolutely.
I thought the interview technique itself was really, really helpful. It put some, I want to say legs, that's not exactly right, but on everything else, to me, on everything else that we talked about for the day, sort of the avenue into that on a very basic, core kind of level, and the connection to head, hearts, hands, gut is easily remembered when I am in such a situation. And I'm trying to do that. That's very helpful in terms of just clicking through it.
It's funny you mentioned that, Brad. I had someone tell me once that this was a very useful process in speed dating. Anyone else about particular insights?
The one-on-one conversation was good.
One-on-ones, okay. What made sense to you in terms of the internalization of labels? And that really came out of, I think, the the lunchtime video?
It's actually easier to remember the bad stuff about yourself, what people say, or about your community. You become the label.
Yep.
Kind of piggyback off of that, this process kind of reminds me a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is trying to like make positive associations, and kind of be more solution oriented. So I thought that was like just kind of interesting parallel.
It's the therapy that works absolutely the best with young people, for sure. Anyone
I'm
else?
going old school. Don't believe what you hear. Read, what is it? Read the pages before the book or something in that regard. Don't believe what you hear, but read the pages. Read the pages. Go beyond the pages.
All right. Okay, the last question is, or Laura, did you have something you wanted to offer?
I'm good.
Your picture came up in front of us. So the last question for the day is something you learned today that you'll put to use between now and next Saturday.
I think John had a good quote that I'm definitely going to use from now on. We each have a piece of a collective puzzle. I was like, oh man, I'm going to steal that and use it for every presentation from now on.
Hey, terrific.
I think that the World Cafe guidelines are just so useful, like inside and outside of ABCD. Just like it's just a better way to facilitate conversations, and it makes sure that people feel heard.
Yeah, it's a terrific process, and we can do much more with that than we did today, too. Other things?
I think the 6 steps for nonviolent change is kind of being like, where am I on that? Have I done the full info gathering step number 1, or did I try to jump right to number 4, negotiation? So just kind of having those listed out was really good.
Good, thank you. All right, well, so it's 4 o'clock Connecticut time. And so pretty amazing. We're not going to mention time ever again, but we actually finished on time, which is terrific. I just want to thank all of you. I think this was great today. You put a lot into it. I think that's always the most rewarding part to me coming back is I know we're doing something right when we get the kind of participation that we've gotten from all of you in all of your communities across the country. I'm one of those people that would much rather see you all in person and be doing this in some room somewhere, and maybe COVID will end someday and we'll be able to do that. John, Avis, any parting words from the two of you?
Just thank you very much. We will be sending some of the materials, and also I'll be cleaning up the chat. So lots of you share great resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Avis.
And just echo, this is a great group. I've learned some things myself, and I look forward to seeing everybody next Saturday.
All right, good.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank
Take
everyone.
care.
Go in peace.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Anyone wants to help? Anyone wants me to help shovel snow? Come join me.
Hopefully I'll make it back to the west.
You be careful shoveling that snow, Bob. I hope you have something to ride on the shovel.
I do not.
Or push. Oh my goodness. Oh Lord. Well, be safe.
Bye.
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 Bye, everybody. John, Avis, we're getting together on Tuesday,
Yeah, same time.
5:30. Good.
Edith, I think, left. She made you
Okay.
the notes.
Well, good. So we'll see you all. John, great job today.
You too, my friend. You
Yeah,
take care.
Take care.
And be safe. Huh?
Yeah, I'll
Don't
be-
go out there and snow, don't shovel any snow right
Oh,
now.
I'm not gonna go crazy, so.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah. As long as you're warm and you have food and
yeah,
you're dry, that's all you need.
got all those things.
Good. Well, you take care now.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
you too, John. Take care.